Morning, Avinash.
Good morning, sir. Pranam, sir.
Dr. Saraswat has joined us yesterday.
Yes, sir. Sir, congratulations to you. And also, we are privileged to have him in Jaipur. Good morning, Pranam, sir.
Good morning, Avinash. How are you?
I'm fine, sir, with all your blessings. We are fortunate that you are finally, both of you are in my home city. So, whenever I will come to Jaipur, I meet you, sir.
Absolutely. We look forward to that. How is Ahmedabad?
Yes, sir. It's a good, sir. We are enjoying work over here. Ahmedabad also like a Jaipur, good working atmosphere over here for the medical fraternity.
I was telling Dr. Saraswat.
Well, a couple of SDPJ alumni have joined recently.
Yes, sir. Dr. Haribhakti to begin with, Dr. Narvaria, then Dr. Kaushal is here.
No, I'm talking of DM Gastros, junior guys. They just joined. Shreya Butala is there in the GCRI.
Okay,
and,
sir.
Arun is also there.
Yes, sir. They are also come, sir.
Yeah.
So now gradually the Gastro family is expanding in all part of the country. I think the department started in way back 97, 19 at AGPJ. The fruit are very well seen. Today we are missing our, would say, departmental godfather, Dr. Kaushik, but he always used to say these words for all the teachers. He feel proud of all the residents working across the part of the country.
Indeed. Good. So I think Karan hasn't logged on yet.
I called him. He's logging in.
He is. Okay.
Sir, Dr. Kapoor sir started very good platform.
That's right.
For teaching the trainees, especially for outgoing of DNB or MCS, so they conducting regular clinical case presentations so they can improve their presentation skill, discussing with their operative sessions, inviting faculty for their faculty presentation, and also we had the open house session where the trainee are free to ask any question. It's a vice versa of final examination. In the final exam, teachers ask question, student has to reply. In open house, student asks the question to the teachers, so they know how to reply the question. So that way he's mentoring all the students across the country or the DNB or MCS courses. I think a lot of people are joining, and we have so far nearly 70 or 80 candidates. They have enlisted and made a like.
So how are you disseminating this information to different DNB centers that there is such a program going on?
Sir, to made a group in the beginning, and same philosophy the sir was thinking. I was thinking since long time. Originally I want to work in an academic center where somewhere the destiny is to work in Ahmedabad. So I want to start some academic platform for that. So for that I made a Gastro University.
My question is that there are so many DNB residents all over the country. And in the south, I know Dr. Jayanti is doing something for DNB residents, and all of them have formed a group of about 80 or 100 DNB residents who participate regularly.
Yes, sir.
These days online, earlier they used to be having classes which they would attend in different centers in Chennai, they had a group in Hyderabad and so on.
Yes,
so
sir.
This is, if information is made available to DNB residents, gastro, surgical gastro and so on, you will get a lot of people who will be interested to join. So I think we need to really figure out and maybe even coordinate with the DNB people and find out how this can be done, because obviously it is of benefit to anybody and everybody, and we are not restricting whether it's DM or DNB or MCH. Everybody is welcome.
Yes, sir.
In fact, Kapoor Sahab, I think combined gastroenterology and surgical gastroenterology presentations and discussions in overlap areas would probably be a unique phenomenon. There's no such platform where you have some joint gastro and surgical gastro participation.
Avinash, Karan.
Sir, please allow Karan for screen sharing.
Yeah, allow Karan to share his screen.
Yes, Karan, now you can share your screen.
Yeah, Karan, please go ahead.
Good morning, all. Is my screen visible?
Yes. Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet.
I think the Jaipur surgical tutorial thing, you need to stop sharing that, Avinash.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
Avinash, you have to stop sharing.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now you start, please.
Yeah. So, good morning, everyone. Today, I will be presenting a topic on chronic liver disease. As you all know, it's a very wide topic, so I just will try to touch each and every avenue of the topic. Layout of the talk, I will be discussing about the spectrum of chronic liver disease. What is the natural history of a patient with chronic liver disease? Which diagnostic tests are available to detect and diagnose a patient with chronic liver disease? What is the pathophysiology of the complications in a patient with chronic liver disease? And finally, the goals and the target of treatment. So just to begin with, chronic liver disease not is a single disease. It comprises of a spectrum of entities ranging from simple chronic hepatitis to a stage of hepatic fibrosis and ultimately culminating into a stage of liver cirrhosis. So chronic hepatitis, the baseline of the first first stage in the spectrum of chronic liver disease is the condition in which when there is an inflammation in the liver. Sometimes it can be detected biochemically in form of elevated transaminases, but transaminase doesn't always reflect presence of chronic hepatitis. In around 20 to 30% of the various conditions, there can be inflammation in the liver with normal liver functions. Then chronic hepatitis progress to a stage of hepatic fibrosis, which is F1 to F3 that I will be discussing in the histological part, and ultimately leading to liver cirrhosis, in which whole of the liver parenchyma is replaced by regenerating nodules and is surrounded by the fibrous septa. It is also related to F4 metabolic fibrosis. So this is the histological spectrum of a chronic liver disease. First of the left-hand side, this is a figured histological picture of a normal liver. Then in the middle, there is a inflammatory cells along with some lobular necrosis and the collapse of the hepatocytes. Then there is a fibrosis, the bridging fibrosis, and ultimately regenerating nodules intervene between the fibrous septa, which is the cirrhosis. So this rate of progression from one stage of spectrum to another, that is the chronic hepatitis to fibrosis and cirrhosis, it is variable, and it is not always that the patient with chronic liver inflammation will progress to cirrhosis. And the rate of progression also varies in different conditions. Like it can be weeks in patient with biliary obstruction and can varies up to decades in patient with long-term causes such as viral hepatitis, hepatitis B, C, even NASH also. If a person has more than one causative factor which is responsible for this hepatitis or this chronic liver disease, then they can have a rapid progression. Some genetic phenotype also has a role to play in the determining the rate of progression. Like PNPLA3 is the now new this molecule. Epigenetic changes in PNPLA3 has an impact on alcoholic liver disease, NAFLD, as well as progression to HCC. So this is a figure depicting the natural history of a chronic liver disease. In any chronic injury, whether it's a viral infection or alcohol, NASH, autoimmune disorder, or any cholestatic disorder like PBC or primary sclerosing cholangitis, or any inherited metabolic disorders due to inborn error of metabolism, they lead to insult to the liver, which will ultimately lead to hepatitis. Then, in attempt to regenerate or attempt to repair, there is a matrix deposition and there is an attempt for angiogenesis, which leads to laying down of fibrosis. And if the insult is ongoing and it is not reversed or stopped, then there is a destruction of architecture, ultimately leading to cirrhosis. This is the first stage, the early fibrosis and the hepatitis stage. They are reversible either by stopping the insult or by means of some pharmacological interventions which are there to treat the underlying cause. The most common cause of cirrhosis we all know is the alcohol-associated liver disease. Then is the metabolic associated fatty liver disease. The earlier term NASH, the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, has been now replaced, or there is something now coming up. This thing is, it should be replaced by terminology MEFAD, metabolic associated fatty liver disease, to give a wide range of coverage to the disease. Chronic hepatitis B and C is the third cause. Coming to the natural history of chronic liver disease patient, once they progress to cirrhosis, then due to the development of this cirrhosis can have two stages: compensated cirrhosis and decompensated cirrhosis. This transition from compensated cirrhosis to decompensated cirrhosis is defined by development of complications in form of variceal hemorrhage, ascites, and or jaundice. The transition rate from a compensated to decompensated stage occur at a rate of 5 to 7% per year. So another thing comes as liver has got maximum regenerating potential. So why some insults, when there is some insult, it leads to fibrosis or progression to chronic liver disease? And in some cases, the liver will overcome the insult and there is a spontaneous regeneration. Basically, it's an interplay between the two factors. The extent of the hepatocyte damage, whether the stellate cells are activated, what is the role of inflammatory cells in form of natural killer cells, and some epigenetic factors by microRNAs. There is a balance between the two, the fibrotic promoting and the anti-fibrotic strategies. The hepatic progenitor cells and T regulator cell and NMY122, they are preventing the fibrosis and helping in regeneration. So whenever there is an insult, the balance between these two factors will ultimately decide whether there will be progression to fibrosis or there will be a recovery after the after the removal of the insult. Coming to the coming back to this natural history of the cirrhosis, this CLD part. As you can see that the most common decompensation in a patient with cirrhosis is ascites, as depicted in the blue line above. The most common decompensation is ascites, followed by jaundice, then comes encephalopathy, and then comes the variceal hemorrhage. I will again like to repeat when this graph was there, the major, including the main patients, the primary etiology of cirrhosis included in this study was NASH and alcohol. Then comparing to this hepatitis B and C, jaundice can have this primary presentation in patient with the hepatitis B with reactivation. So this decompensation, occurrence of this decompensation shortens the survival. The annual mortality rate of a patient with compensated cirrhosis is around 8 to 10%, with a median survival of more than 9 years. Whenever there is a decompensation, the median survival from a patient with compensated cirrhosis decreases dramatically from 9 years to 1.6 years. Now coming to the next concept, once is this acute liver disease, then this chronic liver disease. Now, since the last 14-15 years, there is a disease known as acute and chronic liver failure. So where does this acute and chronic liver failure fits in the spectrum of chronic liver disease? This is a very beautiful diagram. As you can see on the left hand, the normal liver. Whenever there is an acute insult on the normal liver, the injury will lead to acute liver injury or acute liver failure. Then on the right, top right, the spectrum is of chronic liver disease, compensated cirrhosis, and decompensated cirrhosis. Whenever there is any insult on a background of any of these three, it will lead to certain deterioration or worsening of a patient with liver disease, which is known as acute and chronic liver failure. However, the societies, PASL, the Asian Pacific Association for the Study of Liver Disease, and the EASL and the Western societies differ in the definition. As per a PASL, only the chronic liver disease and compensated cirrhosis, whenever there is an acute insult, they develop decompensation, they are considered as acute and chronic liver failure. Whereas in case of the Western definition, even the patient with decompensated cirrhosis, if they develop worsening and extrahepatic organ failure, they are considered as acute and chronic liver failure. I will just try to recreate this figure, this graph with the help of an example. Suppose a patient is having hepatitis B, he is HBsAg positive, and on this fibroscan or on imaging, there is no evidence of cirrhosis. So he will be coming into this chronic liver disease, the first group. Suppose he stops his medications, there will be HBV reactivation, which will lead to development of jaundice and liver failure. Then it will be as classified as the first type of this ACLF. Now, WHO, World Gastroenterology Organization, have classified this type of ACLF as ACLF-A. Suppose a patient again with hepatitis B, but cirrhosis had, but no decompensation, only compensated cirrhosis, stop this antivirus, the complication he will develop will be slightly more than the patient who is having a background normal liver. So this will be classified as ACLF type B as per WHO. And if a patient with decompensated HBV-related CLD already had jaundice, ascites, stop antivirus, then he again develop complication. There is increase in bilirubin from 3 to 13 or worsening of ascites. That will be as type C ACLF as per WHO. Now coming to the important aspect of the talk, the diagnostic test. See how we should diagnose a patient with chronic liver disease. These are the current options which are available for assessment of a patient with chronic liver disease. First is the clinical or the lab test, which is the among them there are the simple tests, the AST level, the AST platelet ratio index, FIB-4 index for NASH, which is the common thing, NAFLD fibrosis score, BART score, and now some other complex testings are available which test about the degree of fibrosis by means of testing of procollagen, apoprotein 3, procollagen type 3, hyaluronic acid levels. These are complex and costly and are not in wide use as of now in India. Then comes the imaging, ranging from simple imaging, the most common imaging test, ultrasound, fibroscan, MR elastography, RP, and ultimately the biopsy, which is the gold standard for determination of a chronic liver disease patient.
Was it Smith?
So coming to the non-invasive assessment of before I start this CLD assessment, the major purpose of all these diagnostic tests is to assess the degree of fibrosis. As all the prognostic, all the future and the course will depend upon the degree of fibrosis. So basically, all these tests are meant to determine what is the degree of fibrosis in a patient who have a chronic liver disease, whether there is no fibrosis or they have progressed to extent of cirrhosis. So this is the coming to the non-invasive assessment of hepatic fibrosis. They are earlier meant for diagnosis assessment of fibrosis in a patient with chronic hepatitis B. Earlier used for patient with Hep B and C, now have been extrapolated to other etiologies also. The first non-invasive test to diagnose the degree of fibrosis is AST to platelet ratio index. Simply, it is a simple, very simple test in which we have to divide AST level, AST elevation above the normal by the platelet counts multiplied by 100. On the basis of AST and this AST platelet ratio index, we can another thing I would like to reiterate is all these tests are basically have a very high negative predictive value. They are meant to rule out significant fibrosis. If these tests are within normal limit or below the cutoff level, then we can say with some surety that the patient doesn't have significant fibrosis. However, if these tests indicate significant fibrosis, they can the positive predictive value of these tests is still low in the range of 40%. Then there is a doubt that fibrosis cannot be there. But if they are within normal limit, they definitely exclude significant fibrosis. So for the APRI, the most simplest and the easiest biomarker to detect fibrosis, it is as already told, it is the division between the AST level and the platelet level. If the AST level is more than 1.3, it indicates presence of significant fibrosis. AST level less than 1.3, lesser is the value. It with the great assurance it will exclude out presence of significant fibrosis or the cirrhosis. Apart from every other index which is used is FIB-4 index, which combines 4 parameters. Apart from AST and platelet, it also includes ALT and age. It is mainly used in patients with, it has been tested, validated for accuracy in patients with chronic hepatitis C. Those who are having high FIB-4 value are at high risk of developing HCC in future also. Now for this disease-specific non-invasive biochemical test for NAFLD, it is a score, NAFLD fibrosis score based upon age, BMI, patient's blood glucose level, aminotransferase level, platelet count, and albumin. For all these, the calculators are available. We have to just place the value in the calculator and easily get the value of the fibrosis score. As in NAFLD fibrosis score, if the cutoff of 0.67, it predicts advanced fibrosis with this high specificity in the range of 96%. BART score again is a score which is meant for validated for NASH, NAFLD. It comprises of body mass index, AST-ALT ratio, and presence of diabetes. It again has a very high negative predictive value.
Let me also listen.
Now, after this biochemical tests which are easily available, coming to the imaging aspect to determine the degree of fibrosis or the cirrhosis, the first and the commonly used investigation is ultrasound. Ultrasound is easily available, is without any radiation, with a cheap investigation which can help to determine the extent of fibrosis. The key marker which can help us to tell us about the presence of cirrhosis or significant fibrosis in patients with chronic liver disease are echogenic liver, nodular liver contour, heterogeneous parenchyma, and enlarged caudate lobe relative to the right lobe. Among these parameters, the nodular liver contour and heterogeneous parenchyma has been found to be most sensitive to determine presence of cirrhosis on ultrasound. You can have a sensitivity ranging from 70 to 78% depending upon the observer. But again, the thing is that ultrasound only can predict two things: the early stage of the fatty liver, as in NASH, or the last stage of cirrhosis by means of nodular liver contour or heterogeneous parenchyma. The intermediate stage of fibrosis, they are not picked up on ultrasound. For that, we need another investigation, which is the transient elastography or FibroScan. FibroScan basically is a brand name of a machine which works on the principle of transient elastography. It determines two things. One is CAP value, that is the control determination parameter, which gives us the numerical value of fat in the liver. Second is the liver median stiffness, which tell about the liver stiffness and the fibrosis. I would like to discuss this regarding this FibroScan in bit detail. This is a figure depicting how this FibroScan works. As you can see that in the middle of the figure, there is a probe. And one end of the probe, there is a transducer. This transducer produces low frequency and low amplitude ultrasonic signals known as the shear waves. These shear waves are made to pass into the liver parenchyma. On the basis of the stiffness of the liver, the velocity of this shear waves varies, and that by a computer, this velocity of the shear wave is translated into a stiffness parameter known as the median stiffness. Just a figure depicting how this FibroScan works. On the left-hand side, we can see that the transducer is placed on the intercostal and the right intercostal space just above the liver, and 2.5 centimeter this 2.5 centimeter above this costal margin, and it releases a shear wave which tells about the liver stiffness at a depth of around 4 centimeter. This on the about the liver stiffness 4 centimeter below the costal surface. So this is the basic principle how elastography or a FibroScan works. It is a very reliable test for diagnosis of cirrhosis in patients with chronic liver disease. It is extensively studied and validated. Again, negative predictive value of FibroScan is very high, 96%. It is more better in ruling out cirrhosis than ruling in cirrhosis. The value varies with different etiologies. As for NASH, the cutoff is 12. For the alcoholic liver disease, cutoff to diagnose cirrhosis is 18. So the ideal the cutoff to diagnose cirrhosis varies by etiology. So another thing is regarding this FibroScan, the important thing to know before interpreting the value of transient elastography and this control determination parameters are, first of all, we have to see this interquartile range or the median value. This will tell about whether the report is accurate or not. There is for the stiffness, normally 10 readings are taken. So this interquartile range basically helps to rule out if there is any outlier which is which is having an impact on the outcome. So this interquartile range in case of FibroScan determination should be less than 30%. Then is the amino transferase level should be less than 5 times of upper limit of normal. In high level of this transferase, they can have a fallaciously high FibroScan or the liver stiffness because of the congestion. In presence of cholestasis also, they can be false high level of high value of liver stiffness by FibroScan. In case of right heart failure and volume overload, again, they can have a spuriously high value of this fibrosis. This is on the left hand side. This is a figure depicting how a FibroScan report is there. In the middle, we can see the 9.6. It is that depicting that it is the stiffness of the median stiffness of the liver. To determine whether the accuracy of the report, we have to see this IQR, which is 5% as this in figure, showing that the value is accurate and can be relied upon. On the left hand side, this 156 is the control determination parameter, telling about the level of the steatosis or the fat in the livers. It is a rapid investigation, painless, bedside. It is bedside investigation, give immediate result, and requires a short training curve, which gives it edge over the ultrasound. So just importance of transient elastography in cirrhosis. In patients with cirrhosis, if transient elastography shows the liver stiffness of more than 19.5, the patient have a high risk of esophageal varices as per the AGA guidelines. As per the Baveno guidelines, they have taken a transient elastography cutoff of 20 along with platelet count of less than 150,000 to go for screening of varices to predict varices. A transient elastography less than 17 kilopascal generally rules out clinical significant portal hypertension. Now, since transient elastography again had its own lectinase, and it can determine the level of fibrosis only in a small segment of liver, that is around 2.5 centimeter of area. If there is any cyst in that area or there is any SOL in that area, that will give a spuriously wrong high or low value of FibroScan. Overcome this thing, the next investigation for determining the fibrosis is magnetic resonance elastography or MRE. MRE is a three-dimensional. It determines the fibrosis extent for the liver parenchyma in three-dimensional displacement vector. The potential advantage of MRE over this FibroScan is that it is independent of confounding factor by BMI. That it can be used in an obese person also. So this is just a figure depicting the setup of the to determine magnet MRE. This is a driver in the center is placed over the right upper quadrant of the patient, and then it is connected to a machine, and patient is made to pass through this MRI scanner. By this software, this passive driver will insert a shear wave into the liver, and the MRI machine will translate that shear wave into stiffness, will convert that shear wave into stiffness, and will determine the level of the fibrosis. So this is how MR elastography reports will come about. More is the red color in the figure, more is the extent of fibrosis. As you can see on the right hand side, there is more red color in the liver, indicating a high fibrosis or the high level of significant fibrosis in this patient. So since we have got this non-invasive test in form of biochemistry, APRI, FIB4, NEFER score, BART score, the non-invasive imaging test in form of ultrasound, transient elastography, and MR elastography. So these tests determine the degree of fibrosis as well as degree of steatosis. So what is left in a patient to determine in a patient with chronic liver disease? Activity. That is the inflammation going within the liver cells. Other thing is steatosis and cholestasis. This cholestasis, whether there is a lobular or the biductal cholestasis present or the regenerating activity which is present in the liver. To determine this activity and cholestasis, only test which is available is liver biopsy. It cannot be determined as of now by any biochemical test. That, as I've already told earlier, the transaminase, they are not a true predictor of activity which is happening in the liver. So gold standard test to determine this activity and cholestasis is liver biopsy. It provides exact measure of inflammation and fibrosis, can detect all cholestasis, it can tell about the regenerative potential of the liver, it has got prognostic implication, can help us to prognosticate about the disease in future. But again, liver biopsy again had its drawback. It is an unreliable gold standard. There can be a sampling error which can lead to misinterpretation in 10 to 15% of the cases. Minimum requirement for an ideal liver biopsy is it should contain a 2 centimeter sample containing at least minimum of 10 portal triads. It can miss the diagnosis of cirrhosis if there is a sampling error, if the biopsy is taken from a non-indicative area. It is an invasive procedure associated with complication, can be expensive, have a poor patient acceptance, and again, the interpretation of biopsy has a significant inter-observer variability. Just to basic, the important things that we have to look for in the liver biopsy is the extent of the inflammation, the distribution of the inflammatory cells, the type of inflammatory cells, the severity of degree of inflammation, any extent of necrosis. And again, is the second important thing is the fibrosis. For this reporting of a liver biopsy, for this inflammation and fibrosis, commonly used system are the Nodal score or the histological active index, then is the Matavir score, and now the commonly used method to describe a biopsy is the Ishak score or the modified Nodal score. Other scoring systems are also there, Sure system, Bat-Ludwig, which are used in patients with PBC, lineage staging system, which is an extension of Nodal scoring only. Nodal scoring system was the first earlier scoring system used to describe about the liver biopsy. It is based upon 2 parameters, histological activity, that is inflammation, and fibrosis. On the basis of these two, it gave a combined score ranging from 0 to 22. It was used for primarily used for hepatitis B and C, chronic hepatitis B and C patients. But since it is a combination of both fibrosis as well as inflammation, so there can be the value, the inflammation can give a false high value even in the absence of fibrosis. So this was a major lacuna for this Nodal score. It was replaced by Matavir score, which is again based upon 2 things: fibrosis and the cirrhosis. Fibrosis was ranged from F0 to F4. F0 was when there was no fibrosis. F1 is when there is a portal fibrosis without any septa. F2 is portal fibrosis along with septa. F3 is portal fibrosis with septa, but the septas are joining, but the regenerating nodules are not there. In cirrhosis, they are regenerating nodules also. Again, the activity was labeled as A0 to A3 on the basis of mild, moderate, or severe activity. The Ishak score is the commonly used method to report inflammation and fibrosis in a liver biopsy. It indicates give us fibrosis in 6 stages. So stage 0 is no fibrosis. Stage 1 is portal or periportal fibrosis without any septa. Stage 2 is with septas. Stage 3 is when there is a portal to portal bridging of the fibrous septa. Stage 4 is when portal vein to central vein bridging of the fibrous septa. Stage 5 is the incomplete cirrhosis, and stage 6 is the complete cirrhosis. This is the most common.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you finish in next about 5-10 minutes so that we can leave some time for questions?
Yes.
Thank you.
So just a single slide upon regarding the pathophysiology of the complications in patients with the chronic liver disease. Starting from the center, the patient with cirrhosis, they have 2 main things: liver dysfunction and portal hypertension. So all the complications are basically due to these two things: portal hypertension and liver dysfunction. Due to portal hypertension, there is a splanchnic vasodilatation, arterial underfilling, leading to activation of RAS, and which leads to development of ascites and can lead to development of renal dysfunction known as HRS. Also, due to portal hypertension, there is formation of portosystemic collators, which can lead to encephalopathy. Again, this liver dysfunction will lead to altered this barrier, which leads to bacterial translocation and lead to bacterial infections and disinfections. So just cirrhosis will lead to portal hypertension and liver insufficiency. Portal hypertension responsible for variceal hemorrhage and ascites, and there's also encephalopathy, liver insufficiency, which is responsible for encephalopathy as well as jaundice, immediate decompensation of. The primary goal and the target of the treatment is to prevent the progression of the disease, to reverse the fibrosis and inflammation, and to restore the healthy liver. The treatment approach is basically two things. First, we have to treat the cause or the insult, as in alcoholic liver disease, alcohol, abstinence from alcohol, and steroid for alcoholic hepatitis, for NASH, weight reduction and control of metabolic risk factor, and nowadays obeticholic acid also for NASH with significant fibrosis. In chronic hepatitis B, nucleotide analogs, tenofovir and entecavir. For chronic hepatitis C, the acting antivirus, the sofosbuvir and velpatasvir. Autoimmune hepatitis, steroid plus minus azathioprine. For Wilson's, zinc and d-penicillamine. For PBC, UDC and obeticholic acid as a second line drug. Other thing is key for the complication ascites, low sodium diet and diuretics. If not controlled, paracentesis, then tips as a rescue or transplant. Varices, again, beta blocker for prevention of varices, EVL to control the bleed and for secondary prophylaxis of bleed, tips if for the rescue therapy or prevention or as a salvage therapy. For hepatic encephalopathy, for treatment of trigger, lactulose or lactulol as a this thing, non-absorbable disaccharides, rifaximin, the gut sterilizer, Lola, zinc, branch and amino acid, and Parto if there is a large shunt. For AKI, HRS, terlipressin plus albumin, midodin octretide albumin is alternate. For HPS, the liver transplant is only effective treatment, and for POPS, some drugs like mezidentan, sildenafil, tadalafil, iloprost can be used. That's for this summary thing. I have made a flowchart ki how we should approach a patient with who suspected chronic liver disease. Suppose a patient who is planned for elective surgery is found to have a deranged liver function. Non-hepatic surgery is found to have a deranged liver function, but otherwise he is asymptomatic from liver point of view. So first of all, we have to look for is if there is any previous LFT available, we should try to know that if there is previously deranged LFT, it definitely indicate that the disease which we are dealing with is a chronic disease. Look for albumin level, which can also help to predict about the chronicity of the disease. AG ratio, if reversal is there, it points toward fibrosis or the cirrhosis thing. If the platelets are low, again, it will highlight toward presence of portal hypertension. On clinical examination, look for splenomegaly on the of the liver, whether the surface of liver is smooth or not. Side by side, etiological workup for alcoholic liver disease, NASH, hepatitis B and C, autoimmune should be done if the suspected CLD is there. Ultrasound looks specifically for liver contour, echogenicity, spleen size, portal and splenic vein diameter, and the type of flow. After comes if there is any still ultrasound is normal and only deranged LFT is there, and clinically we are not sure whether there is this these all features are absent. Then comes a non-invasive fibrosis testing by a fibroscan or a MR elastography. If LSM is less than 8 on a fibroscan, it indicates either there is no fibrosis or a early fibrosis F1. If fibroscan is between 8 to 12, it indicates advanced fibrosis, and if it is more than 12, in most of the condition, it will indicate tell about the cirrhosis. So in patient with LSM less than 8, the next step is to go for liver biopsy depending upon the history and the indication. If 8 to 12 is the window of the opportunity, these patients should be aggressively worked up to determine the cause, as this is the stage if intervening, there is a reversibility. If the LSM is more than 12 kilopascal, that is the patient have established cirrhosis, then there should be screening for portal hypertension either by varices or by HVPG. The varices are not there, patient should be screened for HCC. The disease severity should be determined by CTP and MELD score, and patient should be told that in future they can have need of liver transplant in future, and they require a regular follow-up for the same. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before I ask Dr. Saraswat to comment, just one question from me. So you mentioned the features or the criteria of decompensation. Hepatorenal and hepatopulmonary syndromes also by definition will be counted as decompensation or no?
No, sir. As of now, that only the decompensation ascites, HE, and bleed. Now there is a debate whether to include this not. Since they can also lead to worsening sudden deterioration of cirrhotic patients. But as of now, the 4 decompensations are these only. These are complications of liver cirrhosis rather than as a
HRS and HPS are mentioned as complications.
Complications.
Okay. Students, any student wants to ask anything? Please come forward. You are very likely to get a patient with cirrhosis and portal hypertension in the exam. And if your examiner is from a transplant background, you will be asked some of these questions. So that's why I requested Dr. Karan to give this presentation, because even though we are surgeons, even if we are not involved in transplant, but since transplant is part of surgical gastroenterology training, all of us should know a little bit of chronic liver disease. Yeah, Krishna, you want to ask anything?
Sir, hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, I just wanted to ask about if the person is incidentally detected with viral infections like HPV and HCV, and ultrasound will not show any kind of early changes of cirrhosis. So in that cases, just wanted to know, first we will go with FibroScan, just clarifications regarding the use of FibroScan, sir, and antivirals. Regarding those things, just please clarify, sir.
Very good question, Krishna. Just patient who is having incidentally detected asymptomatic hepatitis B, patient come for pre-operative evaluation, found to have incidentally found to have HPSAD positive. The first investigation to look for is again FibroScan. If FibroScan indicates advanced fibrosis, that is LSM more than 8, then irrespective of the DNA level, irrespective of the biochemistry, patient will warrant treatment. As they have a predisposition to develop sepsis in future and can develop cirrhosis, progress towards cirrhosis in future. Since if the FibroScan is not available, you are working in a setup where FibroScan is not available, then this biochemical test like EPRI, this FIB4, they can use as a surrogate marker. They have a high negative predictive value. Suppose this EPRI value comes out to be less than 1.3, then you can be at least assured, remain assured that it is not significant fibrosis. If FibroScan is available, best. If not available, then this serum test can also be used as a surrogate. Again, the thing is, for all the practical purposes, it is the degree of fibrosis which determines the outcome and the progression. For all hepatitis B, C, as well as NASH, FibroScan is must to determine the degree of fibrosis and predict the future course.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah. No, just to add to what Karan has said, I think you had 2 questions. When should you treat, and what is the relevance and the risk for, say, surgery in a patient who has been found to have incidental detection of B and C, right? So the treatment, I think, as Karan has said, depends on the degree of fibrosis. If you do not have advanced fibrosis, hepatitis C, there is no debate. I think anybody who is RNA positive with hepatitis C infection needs treatment. Hepatitis B, there are many stages of the infection that will decide whether you will choose to treat or not. But if there is cirrhosis, as shown by APRI, FIB4, or the FibroScan, then every cirrhotic with any viral load must be treated. So that's as far as the treatment is concerned. And I think unless the liver function is deteriorated or there is any evidence of decompensation, then the risk for surgical interventions will have to be straight graded. And for a person who is fibrotic, non-cirrhotic, chronic B or C infection, the risk may not be above normal for any intervention. On the other hand, if there is a compensated cirrhosis or if there is a decompensated are obviously very high risk, but even compensated cirrhosis, the risk is increased, and now there are clear-cut ways of predicting the risk of complications and morbidity, mortality before undertaking any procedures or intervention in these individuals. Yes, other queries, please.
Sir, I just wanted to ask.
Krishna, you are muted. Unmute yourself. Yes, go ahead.
Sir, now.
Muted again.
Hello, sir. Now can I?
Yes,
am I heard, sir?
Now go
sir.
ahead.
Sir, in centers where FibroScan is not available, when should we go for the incidental detected cases? When should we go for upper GI endoscopy to rule out these things?
For that, screening of upper GI endoscopy is indicated only if you have found to have cirrhosis. For all hepatitis B, generally, for chronic hepatitis B, varicose screening is not indicated. But if you have a surrogate marker of portal hypertension in presence, suppose you have a splenomegaly, you have a thrombocytopenia, you have a low albumin, this APRI is indicating significant fibrosis, you can go for endoscopy to determine whether there are varices and portal hypertension is there. But if none of them are there, for all hepatitis B, varicose screening is not warranted.
Yes, I think once upon a time, endoscopy was looked upon as a test to diagnose cirrhosis. That is, if you have varices, there are higher chances of cirrhosis and so on. I think now the trend is moving away from doing endoscopy in everybody with suspected chronic liver disease to do, since it's considered to be a invasive, you like to restrict endoscopy to those where you want to predict the risk of presence of high-grade varices with a significant bleeding risk. For that, I think Dr. Karan showed the Babino predictions about splenomegaly, thrombocytopenia, and liver stiffness as measured by FibroScan. And only once certain thresholds are crossed, would you do an endoscopy and have a high likelihood of predicting the presence of high-risk varices with a bleeding risk. So diagnostic to see whether cirrhosis is present or not, are varices there or not, I think is gradually being phased out as a test for identifying the presence of cirrhosis.
Any other student? Any question? Any questions related to transplant also you can ask?
Hello, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, I wanted to ask how should we target the weight loss in the patient of CLD, and what could be the titration level for the diabetic to get the weight loss?
Only your voice is not clearly audible.
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, now please tell me.
Yes, sir. Sir, what should be
Yes,
the
go ahead.
target weight loss for the transplantation, and how should we titrate the dose of diuretics in a patient of transplant till we achieve the targeted weight loss?
The desired targeted weight loss in a patient with ascites with diuretic is 0.5 kg per day. And those who have both ascites plus edema, significant edema, that target dose is, the target desired weight loss is 0.8 kg per day. The dose of that this diuretic is titrated on the initial. The dose is, we have to start with 40 milligram of furosemide plus 100 milligram of spironolactone. Gradually, we can increase up to 4 times the dose, that is 160 milligram of furosemide and spironolactone up to 400 milligram. But since these patients with cirrhosis, they are having sarcopenia, very frail kidneys, very few patients will tolerate up to this maximum dose. So we have to very carefully monitor complication of diuretics while escalating the dose in form of dyselectrolytemia, any renal dysfunction, presence of encephalopathy, hypovolemic status, that we have to assess while titrating the dose of diuretics. But the desired goal is 0.5 kg per day in patient with ascites only, and 0.8 kg per day in patient with ascites and pedal edema.
Yeah, we still have a couple of minutes. Any other student? Anything, any surgical student wants? You want to ask anything in relation to CLD and transplant? Any questions?
Yes,
You want to make any comment? Yes, go ahead.
So regarding your previous question on HPS and HRS, sir, HPS is not a decompensation per se, but it's a MELD exception criteria. So for these patients who have, so even though patient won't fulfill the classical MELD criteria of transplantation, but a patient who has HPS, portopulmonary hypertension, they will still be candidates for transplant because of the fact that only transplant is going to cure the ailment. These guys will get MELD exception criteria, MELD exception scores. Then via that be able to go ahead for transplant. Just like for transplant, we require decompensated CLD. Those would not qualify as decompensation. They would qualify because they would fulfill the MELD exception criteria.
Any other comment from any of the faculty members? Ajay, Anand? Anything you want to say in relation to transplant?
No, sir.
Okay.
Very good.
Avinash, can we
Yes,
close
sir.
then?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Karan. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
We will close. Thanks.
Okay.